The papers hit the table between them like a gunshot, and Sadie Ramsey did not flinch. "Sign them," said the man across from her, his voice carrying the cold satisfaction of someone who had already won. "Sign them and I walk away. You keep nothing, you are owed nothing, and you disappear from Clearwater County before the first frost. That is the deal." Sadie stared at the documents. The candlelight in the solicitor's cramped office bent and swayed as if it, too, wanted nothing to do with what was being asked of her. Outside, the October wind of 1884 hammered the single window of the office, and somewhere down the main street of Harrow's Bend, Texas, a horse whinnied and stamped in protest of the cold. The man waiting for her signature was Gerald Ramsey, her late husband's younger brother. He had her late husband's square jaw and none of his warmth, and he had spent the 6 months since Thomas Ramsey's death building a legal argument that would strip Sadie of every acre, every head of cattle, and every dollar Thomas had left her. He had lawyers from San Antonio. He had witnesses Sadie could not afford to challenge. He had a dark past of his own that he had carefully buried beneath a reputation built on borrowed money and paid favors, and he had her trapped. Sadie pressed her fingertips flat against the table and breathed. She was 26 years old. She had come to Texas at 19 as a bride, had planted a kitchen garden and learned to rope a calf and buried a stillborn child and nursed her husband through 2 winters of fever before he died in the 3rd. She had done everything right, and here she was, being handed a pen by a man whose smile did not reach his eyes. "You will have $37 and the clothes on your back," Gerald said pleasantly. "That is more than I am required to give you." Sadie picked up the pen, and then she set it down again. "No," she said. Gerald's smile thinned. "Excuse me." "No." She stood. Her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it, but her voice had gone somewhere very still, somewhere beyond fear, somewhere where a woman who had nothing left to lose. "I will not sign. You can take me to court. You can drag my name through every courthouse in Clearwater County. You can spend the next 2 years and every dollar Thomas left you on lawyers. And when it is over, Gerald, I will still have been here. I will still have been his wife. And everyone in this county will know exactly what kind of man you are." She walked out of the solicitor's office into the cold Texas night, and her hands did not stop shaking for a very long time. She had $37 in her coat pocket. She had walked away from the settlement and she had nothing to show for it except her refusal, and refusal did not feed a person through winter. She stood on the boardwalk of Harrow's Bend and thought about what Thomas had told her once, in one of his better moments. He had said that the land north of the Brazos was changing, that ranches were growing, that anyone willing to work could find a place in the new Texas. He had meant it as a comfort. Now it was the only map she had. She spent that night in the cheapest room the Harrow's Bend boarding house offered, a narrow slot under the eaves where the roof creaked and the cold came through the boards, and she spread her situation out in front of her the way you lay cards on a table when the game is nearly finished, and you are trying to understand what happened. Thomas's ranch was gone, legally or practically. Gerald had already moved hired men onto the property, and even if she fought the inheritance claim for 2 years, she would starve in the meantime. She had no family within 1,000 miles. She had a decent hand with horses, a strong back, and a willingness to work that she had proven in 7 years of hard frontier living. She had heard, in the months before Thomas died, that a rancher north of Flat Creek had been looking for help. The spread was called the Sheridan Place, and the man who ran it was known for paying fair wages and not asking unnecessary questions. In the morning, she bought provisions for 3 days of travel with careful frugality, saddled the one horse that was legally, undeniably hers, because Thomas had given it to her by name in a letter written before Gerald could challenge it, and rode north. The country between Harrow's Bend and the Sheridan spread was the kind of Texas that did not apologize for what it was. Rolling brown grass, scattered live oaks, the Brazos glinting cold silver in the distance, and a sky so enormous it made every human problem feel both weightless and unbearable at the same time. Sadie rode through it with her jaw set and her eyes forward, and the $37 minus provisions tucked inside her boot. She reached the Sheridan spread on the afternoon of the third day, and the first thing she understood about it was that it was real. Not the cramped, struggling operation she had half expected from a widower working land alone, but an actual going concern. The main house was a solid two-story construction of limestone and timber with a wide covered porch. The barn was large and well-maintained. There were working pens, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, a chicken yard, and a kitchen garden that had been well put up for winter, the beds mounded and covered properly with straw. There were cattle visible on the slope to the north, a respectable herd, Herefords mostly, moving slow and fat in the autumn grass. A man came out of the barn as she rode into the yard. He was taller than Thomas had been, and broader through the shoulders, built for physical work the way a good tool is built for its purpose. He had dark hair going a little gray at the temples, and a face that had spent years in outdoor weather so that it was weathered but not worn, the kind of face that suggested experience rather than age. She put him at perhaps 35. He wore a canvas work coat and he was carrying a length of rope that he was coiling as he walked, and he stopped when he saw her and simply looked at her with dark, steady eyes that held no hostility and no particular warmth, only attention. "You Orville Sheridan?" she asked. "I am," he said. "I heard you need help." He looked at her horse, which was tired and trail dusty, and then at her, which was the same. "What kind of help are you offering?" "Any kind you need," Sadie said. "I can ride, I can rope, I can handle horses better than most men. I can cook and manage a kitchen. I can keep records if you need it. I'm not afraid of hard work and I'm not asking for charity." She paused. "I only need work, that is all." Orville Sheridan went on coiling his rope. He looked at the rope for a moment and then back at her. "Where are you coming from?" "Harrow's Bend." Something shifted in his expression very slightly. "Ramsey spread?" he asked. Sadie went very still. "You know it." "Knew Thomas Ramsey," he said. "Not well, he was a decent man." He paused. "I heard he passed." "He did 6 months ago." Another pause. He finished coiling the rope and hung it over his shoulder. "You have a name?" Sadie Ramsey." He nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he had suspected. "I do need help," he said. "I lost my ranch hand to a mining outfit up near Mineral Wells last month, and my housekeeper left for her daughter's place in Waco before the first cold snap. I have 17 things that need doing at once and not enough hands to do them." He looked at her steadily. "I pay fair, $2 a week for housework and an extra $1 for any day you work stock. Room and board included. You will have your own quarters private in the house." It was more than she had hoped for. It was, in fact, precisely enough to live on while she figured out what came next. "That is fair," she said. "I accept." "You can put your horse in the barn," he said. "Third stall from the left. There is fresh water and hay." He turned back toward the barn. "Come inside when you are settled. I will show you the house." She sat in the saddle for a moment after he turned away, and she felt something she had not felt in months, perhaps longer. Not safety, not quite yet. Something smaller and more stubborn than safety. The feeling of ground beneath her feet. She climbed down from the horse. The Sheridan ranch house was immaculate in a way that surprised her, not a bachelor's grudging tidiness but a genuine, considered order. The kitchen had a good iron stove, a proper dry sink, and shelves lined with preserved goods put up for winter. The parlor had books on a shelf and a writing desk, and a wool rug that had been swept recently. There were 2 bedrooms on the ground floor and 2 more upstairs, and Orville led her to one of the upstairs rooms and opened the door without ceremony. "This one is yours," he said. "There is a washstand and a mirror. The linens are clean. If you need anything that is not here, tell me." She stood in the doorway of the room and looked at the narrow bed with its quilt, the small window looking north over the grasslands, the little table with the lamp, and she thought, with a fierceness that caught her off guard, that she would not cry. Not here. Not in front of this quiet, watchful man who had just given her more dignity in one sentence than Gerald Ramsey had offered her in 6 months. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "Supper is at 6. The stove is yours if you want to use it." He paused at the door. "I am sorry about your husband, Mrs. Ramsey." Then he left, and she heard his boots on the stairs, steady and unhurried, and she sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands over her mouth and breathed until the fierce, stubborn feeling settled back into something she could carry. She cooked supper that first night with the careful attention of someone trying to understand a new instrument before playing it, learning where Orville kept things, how the stove drew, what he had in his larder. She made salt pork and cornbread and dried apple compote with cinnamon, and when she set it on the table she found that Orville had already set 2 places, side by side at the long kitchen table, without a word of instruction from her. They ate mostly in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who had each had a long day and were not yet sure of the language between them. "The cornbread is good," he said. "Thomas always said I put too much salt in it." "He was wrong," Orville said. That was all. But she found herself looking at the corner of his mouth as he said it, where the ghost of something that was not quite a smile lived for a moment, and she found herself looking away again rather quickly. The first week at the Sheridan Ranch was work, plain and full and almost healing in its relentlessness. Sadie threw herself into it with the single-minded dedication of someone who had been still for too long. She cleaned the kitchen properly from wall to ceiling and reorganized the pantry. She repaired the chicken yard fence where a board had gone loose. She turned the kitchen garden beds and added the ash from the firebox as Thomas had taught her, and she began the accounts book Orville had been keeping in a haphazard stack of loose papers, organizing it into something that made actual sense. She also, carefully and without drama, began to make herself useful in the barn. She had not lied about her ability with horses. She had learned young, growing up on a small farm in Missouri, and Thomas had recognized and encouraged it. On her 3rd day at the ranch, she noticed that one of Orville's working horses, a gray gelding named Duster, was favoring his right foreleg in a way that could turn serious if ignored. She cleaned the hoof, found the stone lodged near the frog, removed it with a practiced hand, and had the horse walking normally by afternoon. She said nothing about it. She simply put Duster back in his stall and went back to the kitchen. Orville noticed. She knew he had noticed because that evening at supper he looked at her for a moment longer than usual before he spoke. "You worked on Duster," he said. "He had a stone. It was not serious yet." "No," he agreed, "but it would have been a pause, thank you. It is the kind of thing that needs doing," she said. "I did not think you would mind." "I do not mind," he said, and then, "You are not what I expected." She looked at him. "What did you expect?" He seemed to consider this honestly. "I do not know exactly. Someone more uncertain, maybe. Someone who needed more telling." He picked up his coffee cup. "You just know what needs doing and you do it." 7 years on a working ranch," she said. "Yes," he said, "but it is more than that." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and they finished supper in the familiar silence that was becoming, she realized, something she looked forward to. It was not until the 2nd week that she learned more about Orville Sheridan himself. She had known the broad facts: widower rancher, no children, owned the spread outright and had for several years. What she had not known was the particular quality of his solitude, the way it had shaped the ranch into a place that was perfectly functional and somehow hollow at its center, like a house built by a craftsman who was very good at walls and very uncertain about what to put inside them. She found out about his wife from Orville's neighbor, a stout and forthright woman named Clara Briggs, who arrived at the Sheridan Ranch one Tuesday morning with a pie and an opinion she had clearly been holding in reserve. "You must be the widow Ramsey," Clara said, standing in the kitchen doorway with the pie balanced on one arm. "I am Clara Briggs from the Briggs place, 2 miles east. I heard Orville had hired help. I wanted to see for myself." Sadie invited her in for coffee without hesitation. She had been lonely enough, she realized. That company felt like water in a dry month. Clara sat at the kitchen table and appraised Sadie with the frank, warm interest of a woman who liked people and trusted her own judgment. "You are Thomas Ramsey's widow," she said. It was not a question. "I am." "Gerald Ramsey is a snake," Clara said crisply. "Half this county knows it. The other half has been paid to forget it. It is a shameful business what he is doing." Sadie wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Word travels fast." "In this county it does." Thomas was well liked. "Gerald is tolerated because he has money and a lawyer from San Antonio." Clara looked at her with something almost maternal. "You did right to leave when you did, child. Courts in Texas are no place for a woman without resources." "I may yet fight it," Sadie said, "when I have resources." Clara looked at her with respect and something else, a knowing look, the look of a woman who had been watching the situation in the Sheridan house develop from 2 miles away and had formed certain conclusions. "Orville is a good man," she said, somewhat abruptly. Sadie looked up. "He lost his wife 4 years ago," Clara said. "Fever. She was a fine woman. He grieved properly, and then he closed himself in like a good house in a bad storm, and he has not opened back up since." She sipped her coffee. "It has been doing him no favors." "Mrs. Briggs," Sadie said carefully. "Clara," the woman said, "and I am not matchmaking, I am simply informing. There is a difference." She smiled with complete insincerity regarding the distinction. "He is 34 years old, and this ranch needs more than one pair of hands to be what it could be. That is all I am saying." "I am here to work," Sadie said. "Yes, dear," Clara said. "So you have said." Clara left after an hour, taking her pie tin and her knowing expression with her, and Sadie stood in the kitchen for a moment and told herself firmly that she was not thinking about what Clara had said. She was thinking about the accounts book. She was not thinking about the way Orville had looked at her across the breakfast table that morning, when she had told him the fence on the north pasture needed another post driven before winter, and he had said, without any particular fuss, that he would get to it today, and would she like to ride out with him to see the north herd while they were up that way. She had said yes. It had been practical. And they had ridden north together in the autumn cold, and Orville had pointed out the landmarks, the creek fork, the old line shack, the particular stand of oaks that marked the edge of his property, and he had talked to her about the land the way a person talks about something they love honestly and without self-consciousness, and she had found herself listening with the part of her attention that was not supposed to be available. The north herd was healthy and fat. Orville moved among them with practiced ease, checking ears and hooves, and reading the condition of each animal with his eyes the way Sadie had learned to do in 7 years. They worked without speaking much, which was comfortable, and when they rode back the sun was lower and the shadows long across the brown grass, and Sadie looked at the ranch house ahead of them and thought that it looked, from a distance, like a place that belonged to her. She pushed the thought away with both hands and rode into the yard. The discovery of the hidden letters happened in the 3rd week, and it changed everything. She had been cleaning the upstairs rooms, which Orville rarely used, and in the room directly above the parlor she found a trunk. The trunk was not locked, and she was not prying. She had opened it looking for the extra blankets that Clara had mentioned were stored somewhere upstairs, and what she found beneath those blankets was not a secret in the treacherous sense, but it was a private one, and the weight of it stopped her where she stood. Letters. Dozens of them, tied in bundles, written in the same hand. Letters from Thomas Ramsey to Orville Sheridan, spanning years. She sat down on the floor of that dusty upstairs room and read just enough of one to understand. Thomas and Orville had been close friends in their younger years, before Thomas married and Orville moved north and built his ranch. They had corresponded for a decade. The letters were full of the small, enormous details of frontier life, the price of cattle, the news of neighbors, the slow progress of building something in a hard country. They were also full of Thomas's voice, his warmth, his particular humor, and reading them felt like being handed something she had thought was gone forever. She put the letters back carefully, smoothed the blankets over them, and closed the trunk. She did not tell Orville what she had found. But that evening at supper she said, quietly, "You knew Thomas better than you let on when I first arrived." Orville set his fork down. He looked at her steadily. "Yes. He wrote to you often." A pause. "You found the letters." "I was looking for blankets. I am sorry. I did not read much." "It does not matter," he said, and she could not tell if he meant the intrusion or something larger. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "He wrote me when you were married. He said she is the best thing I have done in my life." He looked at the table. He meant it. Thomas was not a man who said things he did not mean. Sadie's throat went tight. "No," she said. "He was not." "I should have told you when you arrived," Orville said, "that I knew him, that I was glad to help you because of it, among other reasons." He looked up. "I am sorry I was not straightforward. Among other reasons." He met her eyes, and there it was, that quality in his gaze that she had been carefully not naming. It was not hunger or urgency. It was something quieter and more dangerous for its steadiness, the look of a man who was paying close attention and had been for some time and knew it. "You are good company," he said simply. "You make this place feel less." He stopped. "Less like a house in a bad storm," she said without thinking. He blinked. "Clara Briggs. She came by with a pie." "Of course she did." Something genuine broke through his expression then, quiet amusement, and something that she recognized after a moment as relief, the relief of being seen clearly and not minding it. He picked up his fork again. "I did not intend to imply anything beyond what is appropriate," he said carefully. "I know," she said. "I did not take it that way." But she had. She had taken it exactly that way, and the knowledge settled into her like the first real warmth she had felt in longer than she could honestly remember. The trouble arrived in the form of Gerald Ramsey on a cold Thursday in early November. Sadie heard the horses in the yard before she saw anything, and she came out onto the porch to find Gerald, and two men she did not recognize riding up to the house. Gerald was dressed well, trail-dusted, but with a quality to his coat, and his horse that announced money and intention. Orville came out of the barn at the same moment, and he stood in the yard with his arms loose at his sides and looked at Gerald the way a rancher looks at weather he doesn't like. "Mrs. Ramsey," Gerald said, not getting down from his horse. "I have been looking for you." "You found me," she said. Gerald looked at the house, at the ranch, at Orville. His expression was a calculated thing, designed to communicate contempt while maintaining the plausible surface of civility. "I see you have found yourself a situation," he said. "I have found work," Sadie said. "Is that what they are calling it?" Gerald let the implication hang in the cold air. Orville took one step forward, just one. But the quality of that step, the complete absence of hesitation or bluster, changed the geometry of the yard. "You have business here," he said to Gerald. His voice was level and quiet and entirely unwilling to pretend the implication had not been made. "My business is with my brother's widow," Gerald said. "Your business is at the end of a court docket," Sadie said. "Until a judge tells me otherwise, I have nothing to say to you, Gerald." Gerald's jaw tightened. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "No," she said. "You are making it dishonest. I know the difference." Gerald looked at her with the particular fury of a man who is accustomed to winning through pressure and has encountered someone who will not be pressured. Then he looked at Orville with something colder, a calculating look, the look of a man reassessing his approach. "Sheridan," he said, "I know your name. I know this spread. I know that you have been pushing cattle north of the Briggs boundary line for 3 seasons. He smiled. "I have a surveyor's report." Orville said nothing. His face did not change. "That is an old dispute," Clara Briggs said, and Sadie turned to find that Clara had materialized from somewhere, as Clara tended to, with the unerring timing of a woman who kept her ear to the ground. She was standing at the yard fence with her hands on her hips. "It was settled years ago in Orville's favor. You want to try it again. You will need a better surveyor and a different judge." Gerald looked at Clara with barely disguised dislike. He looked at the 3 people standing in the yard against him, and he performed the calculation that men like Gerald were always performing, the one where you weigh what you can gain against what resistance will cost. Then he reined his horse around. "This is not finished," he he said to Sadie. "It will be," she said. "When a judge says so," he wrote out. The two men with him followed without a word. Sadie stood on the porch and watched them go until the dust settled, and then her legs, which had been very steady for the duration, decided they were done with being steady, and she sat down hard on the porch step. Orville was beside her in a moment, not touching her, simply there, a solid and reliable presence at her shoulder. "He is going to be a problem," she said. "Yes," Orville said, "but not today." She looked up at him. He was close enough that she could see the particular shade of his eyes in the cold afternoon light, dark brown and direct and worried about her, in a way he was making an effort to contain within appropriate bounds. "Orville," she said. "Sadie." They looked at each other, and the air between them was full of everything that had been accumulating for 3 weeks, the shared meals and the comfortable silences, and the look he had given her in the lamplight when she said she was the kind of person who saw what needed doing and did it, and the letter Thomas had written that she had not read but felt the weight of, and the hollow house that was not hollow anymore. "Thank you," she said, "for not sending him away before I could speak. It was your fight," he said. "I am just glad you wanted me standing in it." She stood up from the porch step. She was not, she told herself, going to do anything impulsive. She was a widow of 6 months in a new situation, and she had boundaries of propriety to honor, and so did he. She went back inside and made coffee, and did not let herself think about the specific quality of gladness in his voice when he said he was glad to be standing in her fight. She mostly succeeded. Clara Briggs came by the following week with the name of a lawyer in Waco who owed her husband a favor and had experience with inheritance disputes. Sadie wrote a letter that afternoon, careful and detailed, laying out the facts of Thomas's estate and Gerald's actions, and Orville rode to Flat Creek to post it without being asked. When he came back that evening, she had made chicken and dumplings because she had found the ingredients, and because making something good from available materials was something she understood at a deep and fundamental level. "You did not have to do that," he said, looking at the pot. "I wanted to," she said. "You rode 10 miles in the cold to post a letter for me." "That is a small thing," he said. "Not to me," she said. He sat down at the table, and she served the food, and they ate together with the particular quality that she had stopped trying to define and had started simply allowing, which was that being in the same room as Orville Sheridan felt like being exactly where she was supposed to be. That night she lay in her upstairs room and looked at the ceiling and thought about Thomas. Not with grief, exactly, though that was still there, quieter now, more settled. She thought about what Thomas had said in the letter, that Sadie was the best thing he had done. She thought that Thomas would have known, with the particular honesty he had about people, that grief was not a life sentence, that she was not made to be alone. She thought that if Thomas had known Orville, had trusted him enough to write letters to him for a decade, then Thomas would not have been displeased by what was growing in this house. He would have said something careful and warm and a little teasing about it, and then he would have told her she deserved to be happy and meant every word. She pressed her hand flat against her chest and breathed. "All right," she said to the dark room, to Thomas, to herself. "All right." The real revelation came 3 weeks after Gerald's visit, and it came from the most unexpected direction. Sadie had ridden into Flat Creek for supplies on a Wednesday, which was the supply run day, and in Flat Creek she stopped at the post office on the chance that the lawyer in Waco had replied. He had not, but something else had arrived, a letter from a woman named Margox Devereaux, and the name meant nothing to Sadie until she opened the envelope in the post office doorway and read the first 3 lines. Margox Devereaux was the wife of Gerald Ramsey's San Antonio lawyer, and she had something to say. The letter was 5 pages long, and it detailed, in careful and precise terms, a secret that Gerald had been maintaining for several years. Thomas Ramsey's will, the original will, the one Gerald claimed had been superseded by a later document, had not been superseded at all. The later document was a forgery. Margox's husband had been paid to create it, had done so under pressure, and had been living with the weight of it for 6 months. He would not come forward himself, but his wife, who had her own view of what conscience required, was willing to provide a sworn affidavit and documentation if Sadie's lawyer contacted her through proper channels. Sadie read the letter twice in the post office doorway, while the cold November wind pulled at her coat. The trap Gerald had built around her was not as solid as it looked. There was a crack in it, and through that crack, everything she had walked away from in that solicitor's office could come back. She folded the letter very carefully. She tucked it inside her coat, against her heart, which was hammering again but with a different quality than it had the night she walked out on Gerald. That had been raw, desperate courage. This was something else, the particular electricity of a situation that is about to turn. She bought her supplies and she rode back to the Sheridan ranch, and she went straight to the kitchen where Orville was sitting at the table with the accounts book open, because Thursday was accounts day, and he had taken to working on them in the kitchen since Sadie had reorganized them and knew where everything was. She sat down across from him. She put the letter on the table. He read it. He read it carefully, all 5 pages, and his expression did not change very much, but his jaw tightened once, sharply, and she saw something in him that she had not seen before, a cold, clear anger on her behalf, banked and controlled and entirely genuine. When he finished, he set the letter down and looked at her. "You need to write to that lawyer in Waco today," he said. "Today, not tomorrow." "I know," she said. "I will ride to Flat Creek again if the letter is ready within the hour." "Orville." She said his name, and he looked at her and she said carefully, "I want you to understand what this might mean. If this holds up, if the affidavit is genuine and the will is provable, I may have a claim to Thomas's estate again. The ranch in Harrow's Bend. The cattle. Everything Gerald took." She paused. "I may not need to be here anymore." The silence that followed was brief but very full. "I know," he said. "And you are still telling me to write the letter." "Sadie," he said, "of course I am telling you to write the letter. What Gerald did to you is a crime. You deserve what Thomas left you." He held her gaze. "The only thing I am asking myself right now is whether, when this is over, you might want to come back." The word "want" sat in the air between them like a lit match. "Come back," she said. "To work," he said. And then, after a pause that said everything he was carefully not saying, "or otherwise." She looked at him across the kitchen table with the reorganized accounts and the letter with its crackling potential, and she thought about the last 6 weeks, the meals and the silences and the horse with the stone in its hoof and the way he had stepped forward in the yard when Gerald made his insinuation, the quiet, unmistakable declaration of that single step. "Write the letter first," she said. "Let us deal with Gerald." And then she met his eyes. "I think we should talk." Something in him settled the way a good horse settles when it realizes the ground is sound. "Yes," he said, "we should." She wrote the letter in 40 minutes. He was back on his horse with it before the hour was out. The legal process that followed was not fast, because legal processes in 1884 Texas were not built for speed, but it was relentless. The Waco lawyer, a sharp and tireless man named Samuel Weathers, made contact with Margox Devereaux and obtained the affidavit. Gerald's lawyer, confronted with his own wife's testimony, withdrew from the case. Gerald hired a new lawyer, and the new lawyer, upon reviewing the evidence, advised him very strongly that he was on the wrong side of a forgery charge and should settle. Gerald Ramsey settled. The settlement was not everything. The cattle Gerald had sold in the 6 months of his control were gone, and the legal fees consumed a portion of what remained, and the ranch house in Harrow's Bend would need work that Sadie was not sure she had the capital to do. But the land was hers. Thomas's legitimate will was entered into the record. And on a cold morning in late January of 1885, Sadie Ramsey stood in the Flat Creek courthouse with Samuel Weathers and signed her name to documents that gave her back what had been taken. She stood outside the courthouse afterward in the cold January sun and breathed. Then she rode back to the Sheridan ranch. She had been staying through the legal process because it made practical sense, and because Orville had simply not suggested otherwise. and because every morning when she came downstairs to find him already in the kitchen with coffee made, and a look on his face that was carefully neutral and entirely transparent, she had known that the conversation they had agreed to have was waiting for them, patient and certain. She rode into the yard in the late afternoon and he was on the porch, and she knew from the way he stood that he had been watching for her. She tied her horse to the rail and walked up the porch steps and stopped in front of him. "It is settled," she said. "I know. Weathers sent a message this morning. I have land again," she said, "in Harrow's Bend, the ranch." "Yes," he said, "it needs work," she said. "The house is in poor shape and the herd Gerald sold will need rebuilding." "That is true," he said. "Orville," she said. "Sadie," he said. She looked at him in the cold January light, this man who had given her a room and work and honest company, and had stepped forward in a yard and cooked nothing. He never cooked, but had made coffee every morning for 6 weeks and ridden 10 miles in the cold to post letters on her behalf. This man whose face she had learned the way you learn a piece of country that you are going to live in, the landmarks and the weather signs and the particular quality of the light at different hours. "I do not want to go back to Harrow's Bend," she said. He was very still. "I can sell the land," she said. "It is mine to sell or lease it. There are options." She held his gaze. "I do not want to leave this place. I did not expect to feel that way when I arrived here, but I do." She took a breath. "I came here saying I only needed work, but I think I was wrong about what I needed." The silence lasted precisely long enough for her heart to contemplate several catastrophic possibilities, and then Orville Sheridan said very quietly, "What do you need?" "This," she said, "this house, this land." The chickens and the terrible accounts book and Clara Briggs appearing with pies and opinions. The North herd and the creek fork and the mornings when the frost is on the grass and it looks like silver. She paused. "You." He crossed the distance between them and took her face in both his hands, work-roughened and warm despite the cold, and he looked at her for one more moment with those steady dark eyes, asking without asking, and she answered without speaking, and then he kissed her. It was not a tentative kiss. It was the kiss of two people who have been extraordinarily patient and are done being patient, certain and warm and full of everything that had been building in kitchens and saddle rides and shared silences for 6 weeks. When they separated, she had her hands fisted in the front of his coat, and she was laughing quietly, with the particular release of laughing after something that has been serious for a very long time. "I was beginning to wonder," he said, against her temple. "I was not going to do anything before the legal matter was settled," she said. "I needed to know my own ground before I stood on anyone else's." "That is the most practical approach to courtship I have ever heard," he said. "I am a practical woman," she said. "You are," he agreed. He pulled back to look at her. "I would like to court you properly, Sadie. If you are willing, there is no rush." "Orville," she said. "I am 26 years old and I have been widowed and I have had my inheritance stolen from me and I have ridden 100 miles in the cold to rebuild my life. I have been as patient as I intend to be." She looked at him. "Court me properly and quickly, please." He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh fully, without reserve, and the sound of it changed the light somehow, made the cold January afternoon feel like something generous and possible. "Yes," he said. "Quickly and properly, I can do that." The spring that came to the Sheridan spread that year was different from the ones that had come before it, and the difference was not just in Sadie's presence, though her presence was part of it. It was in the quality of the life that had taken root in the house, the way the kitchen was full of sound in the mornings, and the evenings had conversation, and the work of the ranch was divided between two people who were, increasingly and unmistakably, building something together. Clara Briggs came by in March with a pie and a look of elaborate innocence that fooled nobody. "I heard you are officially courting," she said to Sadie in the kitchen. "From whom?" Sadie asked. "Orville told my husband," Clara said. "Which means he wanted me to know because my husband cannot keep a secret from me. Everyone in this county knows this." She set the pie down with great satisfaction. "I'm very pleased." "You had nothing to do with it," Sadie said. "Absolutely nothing," Clara agreed. with the face of a woman who had had a great deal to do with it by the specific method of planting certain ideas in certain minds and then standing back. I simply provide pies. Sadie kissed her on the cheek, which surprised Clara into genuine delight, and they had coffee together in the kitchen, while the March wind pushed against the windows, and the stove made the room warm. Orville proposed in April. He did it with the same straightforward lack of theater that characterized everything he did, and which Sadie had come to understand was not an absence of feeling but rather the opposite, a man who felt things deeply enough that he dispensed with performance entirely. They were checking the south pasture fence on a Tuesday afternoon, both on horseback in the warm spring wind, and he stopped his horse and she stopped hers and he said, "Sadie, I would like to marry you. I would like you to have this ranch and this life and my name, if you want them. I would like us to build this place into what it could be together. I am asking because I love you and because I believe you love me, and I do not think either of us should wait any longer to say so plainly." She sat on her horse in the April sunshine with the grass greening up on the hillside and the cattle visible on the slope and the ranch house in the distance, and she thought about the night she had walked out of a solicitor's office with $37 and nowhere to go, and she thought about the road she had ridden in cold and hope and desperation, and she thought about arriving in this yard and saying she only needed work. "Yes," she said, "I love you, and yes, absolutely yes." He reached across the distance between their horses and took her hand, and they held on to each other in the middle of the south pasture with the spring wind moving through the grass, and it was not a dramatic moment in the way that some moments are dramatic. It was something better. It was the feeling of arriving at the place you were always meant to reach, and knowing, without any doubt, that you are not going anywhere. They were married in June of 1885 in the parlor of the Sheridan Ranch house, which was too small for the number of people who crowded into it, because it turned out that both Orville and Sadie had accumulated more people who cared about them than either of them had fully realized. Clara Briggs was there with her husband, a quiet and good-natured man named Dale, who had apparently known all along that Clara was going to fix this particular situation and had been supportive throughout. Samuel Weathers came up from Waco because Sadie had invited him, and he said he could not miss the ending of a case that had started with such good material. 3 of the ranching families from along the Flat Creek Road came, neighbors who had kept their distance during the legal trouble and wanted, now that it was resolved, to make known their actual sympathies. A justice of the peace named Horace Pemberton performed the ceremony with the specific quality of gravity that small men adopt when they are doing large things. Orville wore his good coat and looked at Sadie the way he had been looking at her since January, with that steady, transparent directness that had never been less than exactly what it was. Sadie wore a dress she had made herself from fabric she had ordered from the Flat Creek General Store, blue as October sky, practical in cut and lovely in effect, and she stood next to the man she was about to marry and thought with absolute clarity that she was the most fortunate woman in Clearwater County, Texas, in the year of our Lord 1885. "Do you, Sadie Ramsey, take this man?" "I do," she said. Horace Pemberton blinked at the interruption. Orville's mouth moved at the corner. She was never going to stop loving that almost smile. "To be your lawfully wedded husband." "She already said yes," Dale Briggs observed from the second row. Clara elbowed him. "I do," Sadie said again, properly on cue, and meant it with every cell of her body. The summer of their first year of marriage was the kind of summer that seems, in memory, to be made entirely of good days. Not because nothing went wrong. Things went wrong with reliable frontier frequency. A stretch of dry weather in August that worried the herd. A problem with the south well that needed 3 days of labor to fix. An outbreak of something in the chicken yard that Sadie dealt with efficiently and without drama. But the texture of daily life had changed in a way that suffused even the hard days with a quality of rightness. They worked the ranch as a genuine partnership. Orville had been a good rancher alone. With Sadie, he became something better, not because she was more skilled, but because two people who trust each other completely and work toward the same end with the same level of honesty and effort can build something that one person cannot. The accounts were immaculate. The kitchen garden produced more than they could use, so she began selling preserves in Flat Creek, and the money from that went into a fund she was quietly building toward the purpose of buying additional breeding stock. She had sold the Harrow's Bend land in spring, shortly after the engagement, to a family from Missouri who had ridden through looking for a place to start. She had sold it at a fair price, and she had watched them ride onto it with a wagon full of children and optimism, and she had felt nothing but goodwill for them. The land was not Thomas's anymore. Thomas was a voice in letters and a warmth in memory, and a choice she had made that had led, through grief and loss and a winter road and a cold ranch yard, to here. She had kept the horse. She would always keep the horse. In the fall, she found out she was going to have a child. She told Orville on a Sunday evening after supper when the house was quiet and the lamplight was warm, and she felt the moment settle into rightness the way the best moments do. He sat very still for a breath, and then he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, which was full and vulnerable and lit with something she could only describe as joy that had been waiting a long time to come out of storage. "Sadie," he said. "A baby," she said. "By my reckoning, April." He took her hands across the table and held them in both of his, and she saw him work to find the right words with the same careful attention he brought to everything, and when he found them they were simple. "I am so glad," he said. "I am so very glad." She turned his hands over in hers and looked at them, broad and work-calloused and steady. "So am I," she said. Clara Briggs, when told, cried without apology, and then immediately began planning the kind of assistance that involved showing up regularly with food and opinions, which Sadie accepted with the gratitude it deserved. The baby came in April, as predicted, on a clear spring morning when the ranch was busy with calving, and the kitchen garden was just beginning to show the first green suggestions of the year. He was a boy, which surprised no one more than Sadie herself, who had somehow simply assumed, and Orville held him with the careful thoroughness of a man doing the most important thing he has ever done. "What do you want to name him?" she asked. Orville looked at the baby in his arms, this small, furious, red-faced fact of the universe. "Thomas," he said. He looked at her. "If you are willing." She was quiet for a moment, not with pain, but with the particular fullness of a thing that means too much for immediate response. "Yes," she said. "Thomas Orville Sheridan, yes." Orville looked at the baby and said quietly, "Thomas," just once, like a gift being returned to the right hands. Thomas Orville Sheridan was a loud and healthy child who announced his opinions freely from the beginning and showed an early and decisive preference for being outside. He was, from his first months, thoroughly spoiled by Clara Briggs, patiently endured by the working horses, and adored by both of his parents with the particular completeness that comes from people who understand that what they have is not guaranteed and are grateful for every specific version of it. In the spring after Thomas was born, they expanded the ranch's cattle operation and hired 2 ranch hands, brothers named Pete and Emmett Carver from the hill country, steady workers who lived in the bunkhouse and kept to themselves, and did their jobs with the quiet professional dedication that Sadie and Orville both valued. The accounts grew more complex and more satisfying. Sadie had a head for numbers that had been unused for years, and the business of the ranch, the buying and selling of cattle, the management of feed and labor costs, the tracking of prices at the Waco and San Antonio markets, became something she managed with increasing skill and confidence. By the fall of that year, she had found them a buyer for their fall herd at prices better than the county average, simply by writing letters to buyers in Fort Worth and tracking the market intelligently, and Orville had looked at the numbers afterward with the expression of a man recalibrating upward. "You have done this better than I have for 6 years," he said. "You were doing it alone," she said. "2 minds are better than one." particularly when one of the mines is yours," he said. She threw a dish towel at him. He caught it and smiled, fully and without qualification, and the sight of that smile still did to her what it had done when she first heard him laugh on a cold January afternoon on a porch that had not yet decided to be hers. Gerald Ramsey made one final attempt. It was 2 years after the settlement, in the fall of 1886, and he arrived in Flat Creek with a new claim and a new lawyer, and the specific quality of persistence that characterizes people who cannot accept that they have lost. His new claim was specious, a challenge to the original will on the grounds of Thomas's health at the time of signing, and Samuel Weathers disposed of it in 3 weeks with a level of professional satisfaction he did not attempt to conceal. What Gerald had not anticipated was that, in the 2 years since the settlement, Sadie Sheridan had become a woman of property, standing, and community connection in a way that Sadie Ramsey alone had never been. She had neighbors who vouched for her character, and a husband whose standing in the county was beyond question, and a Waco lawyer with a score to settle on her behalf. The claim evaporated. Gerald Ramsey left Clearwater County shortly after and did not come back. The last word Sadie heard of him was that he had gone to Arizona Territory with some kind of mining scheme, which she thought characterized him perfectly. He was a man who was always in pursuit of something that someone else had built. She did not miss him. She did not think about him often. He was a chapter that had closed, and the chapters that had opened after it were so much more interesting. 3 years into their marriage, they had their second child. A girl this time, born in summer with a temper already established, and a set of lungs that carried clearly across the ranch yard and possibly into the next county. They named her Clara, which caused the original Clara Briggs to appear at the Sheridan door 3 days later with the largest pie she had ever produced, and a face of such pure delight that Sadie laughed until she cried. "You did not have to," Sadie said. "I absolutely had to," Clara said, stepping through the door with the energy of a woman who has been given a gift she did not know she was waiting for. "Come here, you wonderful girl." She looked at the baby Clara with complete authority, and the baby looked back with the specific expression of a person who has already decided they are in charge. "She has your eyes," Clara said. "She has Orville's stubbornness," Sadie said. "She will need it," Clara said. "To be born into a family like this, she will need every advantage." The years did what good years do. They layered one upon another with the accumulated depth of a life genuinely and fully lived. Thomas grew into a boy who spent most of his waking hours in the barn or on horseback, and showed a gift for working with cattle that made his father's eyes quietly light with recognition. Clara grew into a girl whose opinions arrived before she did, and who had learned to read by the age of 5, and was working through her father's small library with systematic thoroughness. The ranch itself grew and changed, and became what Orville had, in some private part of himself, always imagined it could be. The herd was respected. The land was well managed, rotated and rested the way good land should be. The bunkhouse now held 4 men through the busy seasons. The kitchen garden had become a proper kitchen yard, and Sadie had added a cellar below the house that was immaculate and full by October of every year. It was in the fall of 1890 that Sadie, sitting in the kitchen one evening with the account spread in front of her, and both children doing their lessons at the other end of the table and Orville reading in the parlor, had a thought that arrived with the clarity of something that had been waiting for the right moment. She had come to this house with $37 and a desperate need to be anywhere but where she had been, and she had said, with a courage she had not recognized as courage at the time, "I only need work." And Orville Sheridan had given her work. He had also given her a room, a table, a community, a friendship that had become a courtship, that had become a marriage, that had become a life she would not have exchanged for anything the world contained. She looked at him through the parlor doorway, this man reading his book with his long legs stretched out, and his dark hair more silver now at the temples, and the particular quality of settled contentment. in the set of his shoulders that she had come to read as fluently as language. He looked up with the instinct he had always had for when she was looking at him. "Everything all right," he said. "Everything is perfect," she said. He looked at her with those steady, transparent dark eyes, and he knew that she meant it. She could see him receiving it, and the warmth in his expression was the warmth of a man who has been given back his own contentment, named and acknowledged. "Come sit with me," he said. She left the accounts and went through to the parlor and sat beside him on the settle, and he put his arm around her and she leaned into him. And Thomas at the kitchen table said, without looking up from his slate, "You two are doing that again," with the aggrieved dignity of a 9-year-old. "What are we doing?" Sadie asked. "Being like that," Thomas said. "Being like what?" Orville said. Thomas sighed deeply and put his chalk down and appeared to consider whether it was worth the effort of explanation. "Like you are the only two people in the house." Little Clara looked up from her reader. "I think it is nice," she said, with the firm conviction of a 6-year-old who has decided something. "When I am grown up, I am going to find someone to be like that with." "You are 6, Thomas said. "So," said Clara. Orville's arm tightened around Sadie and she felt him laughing, quiet and warm, before she heard it. "She is not wrong," he said. "No," Sadie agreed. "She is not." The winter of 1890 was a hard one for Clearwater County, cold coming early and lasting late, and the cattle operation requiring the full attention of everyone on the ranch. Sadie managed the household provisions with the careful precision she had developed over years of frontier life, and the cellar that had seemed like an extravagance in warm weather proved its worth completely. Pete Carver, the elder of the two Carver brothers, came to Orville in February with news that he and his brother were going to move on in spring. Their parents' land back in the hill country had come back to them through an inheritance, and they meant to work it. Orville thanked them without drama and told Sadie that evening. "We will need to find new hands," she said. "Spring will be tight," he said. "We managed before," she said. "And Thomas is old enough to be genuinely useful in the barn. Not just the way he has been, but truly useful. He is good with horses." "Better than good," Orville said. "He is better than I was at his age," she smiled. "He has better teachers." They hired 2 new hands in March. A young man named Jasper Webb, who had come out of Missouri looking for work, and had the kind of steady, learning disposition that Sadie recognized as valuable, and an older man named Rogelio Fuentes, who had worked cattle in Texas for 20 years, and whose knowledge of the land and the herds was encyclopedic and freely shared. Rogelio treated Thomas like a young colleague from the first week, which Thomas, at 9 years old, received with a dignity that made his parents exchange a look over his head. The spring brought calving and the usual controlled chaos of a working ranch in its busiest season, and it brought also a letter that arrived in April and that Sadie read at the kitchen table with the quiet, private emotion of a thing that had been a long time in coming. The letter was from Samuel Weathers in Waco. Gerald Ramsey had died in Arizona Territory in February. A mining accident, the official story. Weathers had sent word because he thought Sadie should know, and because there was a small matter of a prior debt Thomas Ramsey had been owed by Gerald that had never been discharged, and with Gerald's estate in settlement, there was a possibility of a small recovery if Sadie cared to pursue it. She read the letter twice. She thought about Gerald, the calculating smile and the thin-edged fury, and the papers he had put in front of her on the night that changed everything. She thought about walking out of that solicitor's office into the cold Texas night, and the road north, and the yard of the Sheridan ranch on a gray October afternoon. She wrote back to Weathers and told him she did not want to pursue the debt. Let it settle with his estate, she said. Let it go. She did not need it. She had more than enough. She burned the original letter in the kitchen stove, not out of bitterness but out of completion, the private ceremony of closing a door that had been ajar for 6 years and did not need to be ajar any longer. Then she washed her hands and went out to the yard where Orville was working with Thomas on the calf roping technique, The boy had been practicing since November, and she leaned on the fence and watched them, her husband and her son in the April sunshine. And she felt the long, clean line of her life run all the way from that cold October night to this warm April morning. And she thought that it was exactly as long and as hard and as full as it needed to be. Orville looked over at her from across the yard, and she smiled at him, and he smiled back. Thomas, at the far end of the line with a small calf that had strong opinions about being roped, said, "Papa, pay attention." "I am," Orville said, not looking away from Sadie. "You are not," Thomas said. Orville turned back to his son with the expression of a man who has been correctly identified and is not particularly apologetic about it. "All right," he said, "show me again, from the beginning." In the summer of 1891, Sadie turned 33. Orville organized a birthday supper with the specific brand of competence he brought to things that mattered, which meant he had Clara Briggs help him with the food, because he had never fully learned to cook and knew it, and he had Dale Briggs bring a fiddle, and the evening turned into a gathering of everyone who had accumulated in their lives over the years. Neighbors and ranch hands, and Clara Briggs holding little Clara Sheridan on her lap, and Thomas trying to look like a person who was not having a wonderful time. Orville gave her a gift wrapped in brown paper that he had clearly wrapped himself, because the folds had the determined imprecision of someone who was giving wrapping paper his full concentration and still losing. Inside was a new accounts ledger, proper and leather-bound, with her name embossed on the cover. Sadie Sheridan, Sheridan Ranch, Clearwater County, Texas. She looked at it for a long moment. It was, on its face, a practical gift. It was, at its core, an acknowledgement of what she had built and what she had become and whose name she wore now, all in 3 words on a leather cover. "The old one is getting full," Orville said. "It is," she said. "I thought you should have one that had your name on it," he said. She looked up at him and he looked back, and they were surrounded by conversation and fiddle music and the smell of Clara Briggs's food and the sound of their children and the warm summer evening of Texas in 1891. And none of it was the life she had been living 6 years ago, and all of it was the life she had been, without knowing it, moving toward. "Orville," she said. "Sadie," he said. "I love you," she said. "I know," he said. "I love you too. I've been meaning to say it again tonight in case it needed saying." "It always needs saying," she said. "Then I will say it every day," he said. "From now until I am too old to remember what day it is." She pressed the ledger against her chest and leaned up to kiss him, and the assembled company of their lives made the particular kind of noise that people make when they are witnessing something real, not the theatrical version of love but the actual working article, built from shared labor and honest words and the choice, made and remade every morning, to be in this life with this person. "All right," Thomas said loudly. He had turned 10 by now and had firm views about displays of affection. "The fiddle is here. Can we dance instead?" "Yes," said Clara Sheridan, who had already climbed down from Clara Briggs's lap and was standing in the middle of the kitchen with her hands on her hips, waiting for the world to provide music. "We should definitely dance." And Dale Briggs lifted his fiddle, and the kitchen opened into the warm summer night, and they danced. The Sheridan Ranch went on and on and on, as good ranches do when they are built by people who care about them. In 1893, they bred their Hereford herd with a new bloodline. Sadie had been researching for 2 years through correspondence with ranchers in Kansas and Colorado, and the calves born the following spring were the best they had ever produced. The fall sale that year broke their own records, and Sadie sat with the accounts afterward and looked at the numbers with the satisfaction of someone who has done a complicated thing correctly. Thomas, at 12, could work any horse on the property and had opinions about cattle breeding that were already more sophisticated than most. Clara, at 9, had read her way through the ranch house library and was corresponding, with Sadie's encouragement, with a school in Waco that would be relevant in a few years when the time came to think about her education. Orville was 42 and showed it in the best possible way. in the experienced ease of a man who has been doing what he loves for long enough to do it without effort, and in the particular quality of contentment that is only available to someone who has been genuinely happy for a sustained period of time. Sadie was 35 and knew things about herself, and about the world, and about what mattered that she could not have known at 26, when she had walked out of a solicitor's office with $37 and a refusal and nothing else. One evening in September, with the nights getting cold again and the first suggestions of autumn in the air, she sat on the porch of the house that had become hers in every sense that mattered and looked out over the land that she knew as well as she had ever known anything. Orville came out and sat beside her, and they watched the last light go out of the sky to the west, orange and then red and then the particular purple of a Texas evening going dark, and the first stars appeared in the east, and the air smelled of grass and horses and the beginnings of wood smoke from the kitchen stove. "Do you ever think about the night you left Harrow's Bend?" he asked. She considered this honestly. "Sometimes. What do you think about it?" "I think about how frightened I was," she said. "Not of Gerald particularly, of not knowing what was on the other side, of having no map." She paused. "And I think that everything I was afraid of losing had already happened by then. Thomas was gone. The life I had planned was gone. I had nothing to protect by staying." She leaned against his shoulder. "And I think I was more afraid of signing those papers than of riding into the dark." "What would you have done if the road north had gone differently?" he said. She thought about it. "I do not know, found something else. I was not going to stop." She turned to look at him. "But I am glad the road went this way." He put his arm around her. "So am I every single day, Sadie." "Every single day," she said. They sat together on the porch of the house that had been offered to her as a workplace and had become the center of her life. And the stars came out over Texas one by one, and the darkness was the good and ordinary darkness of a safe night. And inside the house their children slept, and outside the horses were quiet in the barn, and somewhere out on the grass the cattle were moving slow and contented, and all of it was real, all of it was theirs. All of it had been built on the foundation of a woman who had refused to sign, and a man who had opened his door. And what had grown from those two simple acts was this: the immovable and permanent and daily miracle of a life that was exactly what it was supposed to be. Orville kissed her temple. She closed her eyes. The stars watched over the Sheridan ranch as they had done every night before and would do every night after, indifferent and enormous and very, very beautiful above the dark of the Texas plain. And Sadie Ramsey Sheridan, who had ridden north in desperation and arrived somewhere she had not known she was looking for, breathed in the night air of the life she had built and the home she had found, and felt nothing but gratitude, clean and complete and absolutely without doubt, running all the way down to the bone. Inside, the lamp on the kitchen table burned warm and steady, and the new ledger with her name on its cover lay open to the first page, and the first line of the first entry read simply in her careful and precise hand: "This is what we have, and all of it is good." It was. It was more than enough. It was, in the end, everything.